In a conversation with a friend, originally from Pakistan, I lamented that country's recent decision to give its head of army expanded powers, including lifetime immunity from legal prosecution. My friend replied, "We're just following in America's footsteps. Didn't your Supreme Court rule that the president could kill his political opponent and yet be immune from prosecution?" Welcome to America's new democratic export, the unchecked executive. If America's founding fathers were to come back and look at their legacy, what would stun them, without a doubt, is the modern presidency. They designed the American political system explicitly to fragment power. They were reacting against a monarch and the accumulation of all powers in the same hands. That's a quote from Federalist 47. They purposefully conceived of a decentralized and restrained executive, described in the notably brief Article 2. The presidency was an office for faithfully executing the laws, bounded by carefully constructed checks from the legislature and the judiciary. Congress, by contrast, was named the first branch of government and vested with the lion's share of authority, the powers to tax, spend, declare war, and regulate commerce. James Madison, the de facto author of the Constitution, explicitly acknowledged this fact in Federalist 51, writing that in Republican government, the legislative authority necessarily predominates. Even Alexander Hamilton, often thought to have urged an imperial presidency, in fact believed strongly that the president had few monarchical powers. In Federalist 69, he contrasts the British king with the American president, saying, "The latter is elected for merely a 4-year term and is amenable to personal punishment and disgrace." He adds that Congress and not the president had been given the powers to provide advice and consent on treaties, declare war, and raise an army. The reason the president's foreign policy powers are mostly limited to military command, he explains in Federalist 75, is that an avaricious man might be tempted to betray the interests of the state to the acquisition of wealth. An ambitious man might make his own aggrandizement by the aid of a foreign power the price of his treachery to his constituents. Yet by the 1960s, this finely tuned mechanism had clearly seized up. Wars, economic crises, and the media's tendency to nationalize and centralize attention created a one-way ratchet for ever-increasing unchecked presidential power. This dramatic imbalance culminated in the constitutional crises of the Vietnam War and Watergate, and in the 1970s, Congress, finally energized by bipartisan outrage, passed a series of laws designed to rein in executive excess. For example, the Inspector General Act of 1978 created a cadre of internal watchdogs to root out waste and fraud in departments premised on the understanding that they would be protected from political retaliation. The whole set of restraints didn't work. While Congress established the legal mechanisms for control, for example, regarding war powers, it lacked the collective political will to hold the president to them. Furthermore, after 9/11, war on terror resolutions effectively nullified these restraints, all but giving presidents carte blanche for the use of military force. Beyond laws, after Nixon, both parties had agreed to a set of powerful norms. For example, firewalling the Justice Department from the White House. One principle established that the president should not direct the Attorney General to investigate or prosecute specific individuals. Additionally, presidents voluntarily released their tax returns and placed assets in blind trusts, financial transparency designed to assure the public that the commander-in-chief was not profiting from the office. The Trump administration has shredded these constraints. Even worse, the most egregious violations have been sanctified by the Supreme Court, based on the bizarre unitary executive theory. This once fringe legal doctrine asserts that a terse phrase in Article 2 somehow grants the president unrestricted authority over the executive branch. Even though Congress has been explicitly given the power of the purse, and can use it to create agencies and departments, determine their structure and functions, and direct where its funds be spent, the president has virtually unlimited powers under this interpretation to run those agencies even when he violates specific congressional intent. This expansion of executive power has culminated in the court's 2024 decision in Trump v. United States, in which the court held that the presidents enjoy absolute immunity for actions within their core constitutional powers and presumptive immunity at a minimum for all other official acts. In a blistering dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor noted that under this standard, a president could arguably order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival and be shielded from criminal liability, provided the order was given through official channels. The American presidency has journeyed from a modest, constitutionally constrained office to a super presidency that commands total attention and power. Donald Trump has pushed these powers to the utmost, but he has been enabled by a failure of political courage in Congress and an ideological Supreme Court that seems to have lost any respect for original intent and precedent. The result is a structural asymmetry where the first branch of government is now the weakest and the Supreme Court is a rubber stamp. The court does have a chance to stop this accumulation of power by asserting what they plainly know is true, that the president can't just declare national emergencies at will to place and remove tariffs unilaterally. If not, the American presidency will become for the world not an example of limited constitutional government, but rather of a modern dictatorship, wielding far more unbridled power than George III did when the Founding Fathers rebelled against him 250 years ago. America is a deeply divided country. Polls show that Democrats and Republicans not only disagree on policy, they each believe that they are operating with a different set of basic facts. It is in this political climate that the United States will celebrate its 250th birthday next year. In honor of this milestone, the historian and biographer Walter Isaacson has written a book about the most famous sentence from the Declaration of Independence. As a reminder, it reads, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." The book is called The Greatest Sentence Ever Written. Welcome, Walter. I just said the sentence, so what more is there for us to discuss?
Well, let's look at the edits of it. It's wonderful that the first draft, those of you and I were both writers and editors, is in the basement of the Library of Congress, and Jefferson starts it with, "We hold these truths to be sacred." And there's Benjamin Franklin's black backslashes of a printer putting in self-evident, because he had just come back from visiting David Hume, who talked about self-evident truths of logic, saying, okay, our rights come not from the dogma of religion, but from reason. Then the sentence goes on, they're endowed with rights.
That itself is fascinating, because so many people think of this as being divinely granted, and they're almost saying no. It's
almost saying no, but the sentence goes on to say they're endowed by, and it's John Adams' rights, their Creator with rights. And so you see, just in the editing of a half of a sentence, them doing the balance of the role of divine providence, the role of rationality in creating the nation, but not making it totally based on religious beliefs.
To you, what was the attraction of looking at the Declaration at this moment?
Well, as you said, it's our 250th, and as you certainly know, and you've written about the rise of populism not too long ago, we're in no mood to celebrate a birthday party. We're very divided. It's like Thanksgiving or whatever, we have to all come together. Well, I figured, how could we do what we did in 1976, when after Watergate, Vietnam, and the riots, we had a bicentennial? Well, maybe if we all reflect on the mission statement of our country, which most of us can subscribe to as an aspirational thing, not something we've achieved or they achieved, but we have to keep achieving, then maybe some of the poison in our politics could be sapped out. When you look at how they did the Declaration, you have all sorts of people with different perspectives. Some who are slave owners, some who are abolitionists, And yet they come together to say this is a mission statement that can live and breathe. When Jefferson takes Locke's idea of life, liberty, estates, and property and turns it into life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it's a breathing phrase that sets the stage for the American dream. So I think we can all embrace it.
Talk about that for a minute, because that's so interesting. You're right. John Locke says life, liberty, and property, and then Jefferson in the Virginia statute says property, right?
Well, George Mason does most of the writing of the Virginia statute, but you're absolutely right. It says property.
It says property and happiness, or just property?
It says estates and property.
And property. Right. So do we know what Jefferson was thinking when he enlarged that phrase?
The pursuit of happiness wasn't just, okay, let's have fun and parties. It was a pursuit of your own fulfillment. And he had read, Voltaire, Rousseau's De Social Contract, and I think he's trying to say each new generation has got to figure out its own pursuit of what will fulfill it. And for most of our history, we've been able to have each new generation do better than the last. Nowadays, that's in jeopardy. That's the American dream in jeopardy. But that, too, was part of what Jefferson was pledging us to try to pursue.